Hey everyone, it's Nick with the Whip Shop. Now in today's video, I'm going to be showing you my current method for building a nylon bullwhip.
Listen to this beautiful sound. That's one of my favorite sounds in the world right there. It's the promise of spring, my friends.
Alright, so here we are. We're outside tonight. I could not resist coming outside, even though it is a little bit chilly. I got the coat going, but that's alright. I just think it's a beautiful, perfect environment to ease your mind as you work on a whip. We do have two cameras rolling this evening, and one across the table and another one right here. Hello! That way you can see what I'm doing better, hopefully. This is the same camera setup that I used on my herringbone knot tutorial just a few weeks ago. I hope you guys like it, and do let me know in the comments if you do. Let's take a look at our material that I'm using nowadays for my handle. This is no longer 1/4 inch steel rod, but it's 7/32 of an inch. And why did I do that? I did it because I felt like that little step down just gave me a tiny bit slimmer of a profile, especially coming off the handle into the thong of the whip. I just liked it. It was a little more sleek, and I felt like at 16 plat those strands really stacked together just a little bit better and eliminated the possibility of any gaps. Now this is spring steel. If I'm not mistaken, it's a high carbon steel. They add carbon to it, they heat treat it, this, that, and the other, and the finished product is a steel that is very firm, and it can be bent, but it always snaps back true. So especially if you have a smaller diameter and a longer handle, it will actually flex, and you feel it doing so while you're throwing the whip, but it always goes back straight, and that's the beauty of spring steel. It's also known as music wire. It still has the label on it there. We may or may not take that off before we start assembling the whip. But I was looking online for spring steel, and oddly enough, I found a place called Granger Industries. There's a link in the description for this material. They are within 20 miles of my house. They're actually over in Gary, Indiana, which is pretty close to here. The next thing that I'm doing differently these days is if I have a handle that's 10 inches, I cut it to 10 inches. There's no more make it 11 inches, cut that extra inch off in the end. We're not doing that anymore. I have some ways around that that we'll get to momentarily. So what I've done to the handle, this is pretty much the same. I just really kind of rounded off the end that we're going to be slipping our sinker cord over. I don't want any sharp edges that could potentially tear through the core of my whip. So that's the reason that I'm really sanding that down. I'm also kind of roughing up about 3 or 4 inches up that steel so that when I go to bind this on in a few minutes, it grips a little bit. We're going to be wrapping it tightly, but it gives that little extra bite that I like and I feel comfortable doing. I will say this, it is very difficult to cut, and I'm actually cutting it nowadays with a bolt cutter. It's just much quicker, it's easier, and I'm not going through, 2 blades a week. If I were to cut this spring steel with a hacksaw, I'd be wasting blades left and right. So get yourself a good bolt cutter to cut this. If you don't have access to spring steel, you don't have to have it. It's what I use now. You could even go with the 1/4 inch steel rod that I used previously if that's more accessible. If you're unable to get any steel rod of any kind, you can always find a screwdriver in the hardware store and sacrifice it. Put it in a plastic bag, take a hammer, and smash the handle off. As funny as it sounds, that will give you a steel rod that you can use in a pinch if you have to have it. So this whip that we're going to be making today is going to be 6 feet. It's going to have a 10-inch handle, and I've cut 10 inches. Makes sense. Next, we're going to be talking about our sinker cord. I'm using 3/8 inch sinker cord from the paracordstore.com. Link in the description for that as well. This is one of the biggest things that I've changed on all of my whips nowadays, unless otherwise requested by a customer, or if I'm feeling experimental. I only fill the core with 8 to 12 inches of BBs. I felt like loading the thing with BBs any longer than 12 inches was overkill. And given I do still have customers from time to time that want that extra weight, so in that case, I will fill it with that many more BBs. I will do 2 feet, 3 feet of BBs. Personal preference, but for me, I enjoy 8 to 12 inches of BBs because at the end of the day, when I wax the whip, that amount of BBs plus the wax, I just feel yields a more balanced finished product of a whip that throws better and it's not so heavy. The next thing you're going to see here in a few minutes is that once I've filled, we'll say on this whip we're going to be filling 8 inches of BBs, the next inch I'm going to actually cut off that sinker cord. So I'm really only using as much sinker cord as I need for the BBs. And as we plait those bellies, those dropped strands will be taking the place of this sinker cord core. I found that this really helps with the taper overall, and it also allows us to get a thinner point at the end of the whip. First thing we're going to do is we're going to load this sinker cord with some BBs. I'm still using the 4.5 millimeter steel BBs. It doesn't really matter what kind you use, in my opinion. The kind that I'm using today, I think some of them are copper plated. The rest of them are zinc plated, but a BB's a BB in my honest opinion. So let's do it. All right, I'm going to take my 3/8 inch sinker cord and I'm going to put it in my clamp. And I'm just going to take some artificial sinew and I'm going to tie off a little stopper here. And what this is going to do, just like you've seen in so many previous builds on this channel, it's going to simply, let me just adjust this camera real quick. And what this is going to do, like you've seen in so many previous builds, we are simply creating a stopper so those BBs don't slide down the core. Once I have a few wraps there, I'm just going to tie that off like that. Nothing crazy to that. I'll give it 3 just for good measure. Now 8 inches of BBs is personal preference, as I just mentioned. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my tube that you've seen here and I'm just going to slide this tube inside of my sinker cord. And this stuff is great. It has an interior diameter of about 5 millimeters. So the next thing I do, you'll notice that I no longer have my little funnel on this thing. It's because I found a more efficient way. I'm just going to pour these BBs into my hand like this. Just a pretty good little portion there. And I'm just going to scoop them up like this, kind of running along the natural creases in my hand. Every now and then I'll just kind of dip it back a little bit, but I found this does wonders in getting those little BBs inside of the tube. Now this actually might be too many, but that's all right. But notice, look at how fast that's gone. I think this is actually quicker than the little funnel that I had. But this is a good way to do it, I think. And once again, there's a link in the description for this brass tubing. Or if you're near a hardware store that's open right now, there is a pandemic going on, so a lot of places are closed. So once we have all those BBs in there, we're just going to slide right out like this. And then I want about an inch BB free. And that's the part that we're going to slide over our steel here in a second. So I'm holding the end of that with my finger, and then I can just right back in the little container. And we'll set those aside. So there, that's about 8 inches of BBs. And the last inch to inch and a half is free there. BB free. See that? And now we can take our steel rod. I'm actually just going to dress this up just a little bit. I'm going to cut off that fray there. I don't like that. There we go. I just feel better about myself now when I did that. I don't know. So now we can take this. We got an inch free here. And I'm going to slip that 10-inch handle inside there. And then I can put this thing in my clamp. And this is a wonderful little clamp that was given to me by my friend Nico in Germany when I visited in 2018. It wasn't that long ago. So that's in place. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach into my little whip bag here, which is actually just a modified painter's bag. And I'm going to grab a little bit of electrical tape. And I'm just going to wrap a little bit on here to hold this in place. I'm going to start here. And I'm going to wrap very tightly right there. And I'm just going to stop right there. I need to tighten that clamp up a little bit, don't I? There we go. See, just a little bit. Don't panic. Just a little bit there to hold that in place. Now we're going to come back with our artificial sinew and really, really bind this down. Just making a little loop like this. You guys know how to do this. And I'm just really, really pulling tight, nice and tight. We don't want this to ever come off. I'd like to say that you can't really over tighten this part, but then again, I've been known to be an over tightener. So now we're just ready to step off of the steel. Because of the nature of the sinker cord, once we get those BBs all in line and things start to really compact, it'll stretch a little tiny bit. And as you can see, there's about 1 BB's width of stretch, of space that we have to occupy. And we're going to do that with the artificial sinew. So here I'm coming off the handle, you can see right there, coming off the steel. And now it's like I've just fallen into a little step there. And I'm just going to fill that in with my sinew and replace that area. And this happens just because of stretch. It's nothing to worry about. We're just stiffening this up a little bit and filling in where that BB was. Everything shifted down just a little bit. Artificial sinew is a good molding material sometimes, I think. It's almost like clay. You can, or putty maybe. You kind of get it to go in places and fill in gaps and what have you. So see that? That transition looks pretty good. I like that. It's stiff, but not too stiff. We'll worry about achieving more stiffness as we tie our next belly, or tie the first belly on and then bind it. So now see, I'm just going down here, and this just what this is doing is it's just filling in kind of the spaces on top and between those BBs, holding everything in a nice line. And then we can zoom out like that. So now we've reached the end here. I'm going to move this up a little bit, just a little bit there, and I cut it there. And I'm going to take it and just tie a couple of half hitches to tie that off like that. Very good. So now you're going to see me do something that I've never done before on this channel, I don't think. And that is, well, first I'm going to trim off these crazy little antenna looking pieces of sinew. So as you can see, here is the handle. And here is where the BBs end, right here. An inch after those BBs end, I'm going to snip off the remainder of that sinker cord. And that's something I've never done before on this channel. You've never seen something like this on this whip making channel. And as I've said previously, what we're going to do is we're going to be plaiting our first belly. Along here, we're going to be plaiting our first belly, And the first strand is going to be dropped right here. It's going to fill in, become the core, and take over where the sinker cord was discontinued. So the next step, I'm going to reach down here and grab some more hockey tape. This is actually a different brand, Howie's. It still smells like fish, don't you worry. And I'm just going to, just above where that sinew is, I'm going to wrap the steel at a very steep angle. And the only reason I do this is so that paracord isn't sliding around on that bare steel. Just like that. And ladies and gentlemen, we have here a prepared core. We are now ready for our first belly of this whip. So how far should the braided portion of each belly reach? That's a question that I'm often asked through email. People call me and ask me that question, through Facebook, etc., etc. The way I do it is I take the number of braided layers, that number, and I divide it into the overall length of the whip. 2 bellies and an overlay, it's thirds. So in today's instance, we're making a 6-foot whip. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So basically what that means is the first belly needs to reach 2 feet of braided section. The next belly needs to be 2 times that, so 4 feet. And of course, the last braided layer, which is the overlay, needs to reach the entire 6 feet. So that's how I do it. So for this whip, I'm going to be using the strand lengths found on my website, nickswhipshop.com. They are also in the description. So let's take our strands for our first belly and let's attach them. Okay, so I have my 4 folded strands here for our first belly. And once again, all strand lengths are in the description. They're also right here. Here are the strand lengths for this first belly. Now all these strands, I found the middles, as you can see, by tying knots. And these are the exact middles. I don't worry about staggering things 2 inches, 3 inches anymore. I don't do that anymore. There's really no need to do it. We learn. So let's go ahead and let's tie on this first belly. So nothing different here really for the most part. 2 strands, making sure that those indicator knots are in the back. And next, I'm going to take those remaining strands, open up a little eye, and I'm going to slide those 2 strands through. Nice and simple. There's nothing new to that procedure, but there is something new to this next procedure. So I talked about how we no longer add an additional inch to an intended length for a handle. We cut handles a certain length and we do it and we mean it. In other words, this handle's intended to be 10 inches long and we cut it 10 inches long. We are not going to be cutting any steel once this whip is, once the overlay has been put on. What we're going to do is we're going to simply begin plaiting 8-plat, under 2 over 2. Just for a couple of passes here, a few passes just to establish the beginning of a whipmaker's plait, aka herringbone pattern. Those are 2 interchangeable names. So that looks good to me. Once I've established a few plaits, I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to push it up about a 1/2 inch past the top of this handle. And it's going to feel a little bit weird. And once everything's done, this end is going to be a little bit floppy. Once we finish each belly, we're going to be binding it so that the heel knot foundation has a strong, firm layer underneath to penetrate, and those staples really hold things in place. But something that you can see here is that the steel actually starts here. We're going to be doing this with every belly, so at the end we are going to be cutting off these knots, but we're not going to be cutting through steel. Spring steel is just too hard. It doesn't allow that. And you're saving yourself a bunch of time. So that's something I'm doing differently now. I am not cutting off the end of the handle. So you can see it's right about there. So we're pushing it a 1/2 inch up, 1/2 inch up, And now we don't have to worry about it. So I'm just kind of finger tight plaiting here, as you can see. And then now, a little bit later, we're going to start pulling a little tighter. So now, there we go. See that? See that knot move? Another nice thing about indicating your middles with knots is that those knots lock things in place so that you can pull really tight and it keeps it from submerging like a snake in a hole. And it won't disappear underneath the rest of the strands. Just keeps everything even. So see, the steel ends here. We won't have to cut any steel at the end. So the rest of this, you guys know the drill. I don't recall, honestly, if I did what I'm about to do in my previous current method video, but there is simply no need to plait a single strand herringbone pattern over a belly on a handle. Nobody's going to see it, and it's just as strong to take 2 strands at the same time and doing a 2-strand under 2 over 2. It speeds up the process times 2. Some raccoons are fighting real loud over there. I don't know if you can hear them or not, but savage. So that's what we're doing. So I'm just going to be plaiting this handle, 2 strands together, pulling, just like that. And you can find that you can really fly along quickly if you're doing 2 strands on the handles. So I'm going to keep plaiting all the way down this handle until I reach the point at 1 inch before the steel ends. I'll meet you there. Okay, we've reached 1 inch before the steel ends. And this is something new that I'm doing. I'm doing a single strand diamond plait over the transition where the steel ends and the BBs begin. And the idea is a single strand diamond plait, there's a lot more surface area, there's a lot more gripping in instances of strands on strands, like a net. And physics just say that it's going to be a stronger weave. So we're going to do that. So upper left, the top strand, surface strand here on the surface points to the upper left, under or around the back, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1. And you guys know how to do a single strand diamond plait. So this is something that I'm doing new, and I found that this, combined with a good binding practice coming up here shortly, it's worked wonders for me, and I've found a lot of improvements in my whips along the so I found that this works really well and yields a nice extra tight springy transition. So there we go. I gotta make sure I don't lean into the view of the camera over my head. I did that a couple weeks ago. I had like half of this video filmed, and I reviewed the footage and found that I was like this the whole time. It's really frustrating. It was warmer then too, but it happens. So I'm gonna carry this on till I get about here. I don't need a whole lot, in my opinion, on that first belly. So I'll do 2 to 3 inches of this diamond pattern, and then I'm going to go straight back in, or I should say not back into, but I'm going to go straight into a single strand herringbone of under 2 over 2 and 8 plait. So it's a little more time consuming, but in my opinion, I think it's worth it. So I do it. There we go. Under, over, under, over. Very good. as always with the diamond plait, I'm making sure that I don't pull so much down and up, but every time I go around and I complete a pass. There are different ways of doing this. We all have our different ways. I'm not saying that my way is the only way by any means, but it's important if you're using my methods that after you get done with each pass, I'm taking the strand before I plait it. So for example, this strand on the surface points to the upper right. This is the next one. I'm giving it a pull outward and I'm shoving it up and down, and that really helps attribute itself, I think that's the word I'm looking for, lend itself maybe, to a 360-degree uniform diamond plait. Otherwise, if you just plait it like you would for a herringbone, you get a beautiful pattern on top, uniform pattern on top, but the back, the diamonds are all skewed. So that's a subject matter, I think, for a future video. We'll look into the physics of a diamond plait. So, see, this is coming along pretty well here. Less talk and more plaiting. So I like to just do a few passes, and then with this diamond, I go back and snug things up. I've just never been good at the whole plait loose, pull tight when it comes to a diamond pattern. I just have an interesting way of doing it. Not that it's more efficient, but it's how I do it, how I learned. So see that pushing each strand, I'm kind of pushing and shoving around the back. So that's about good. You can see it snugging up. Ow, that hurt. What did I do? So look at how tight that is. I mean, you can't tell how much pressure I'm putting on that, but that is a nice snug transition right there. I'm happy with it. So that's a couple of inches. That's all I really want. And now 2 inches, we can go directly into a single strand herringbone pattern. So top strand pointing to the upper left, we take that around the back, under 2, over 2. And you could be more fancy about it and take some procedures and take some steps to make it look a little better going into that herringbone. You could not go straight into it, and there are ways to. There we go. So I'm still pulling fairly tightly here, more so than I was. There we go. I'm just going to slide this up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. And now I'm just going to plait normally all the way down until I reach the end of this. I'll meet back up with you when there is an inch left. We're not dropping any strands until I meet back up with you here. Okay, so we are just about to the end of the core, the BB loaded portion. And as you'll notice, we look at it again, the sinker cord stops 1 inch after the BB stop. So the idea is we don't really need that sinker cord there when we have strands that we will be dropping to make up the core. I found it a bit unnecessary to continue that on 1/3, I believe it was for the previous video, 1/3 the overall length of the whip. So I want to, as we arrive to where we are going to be dropping our first strand, I want to briefly discuss dropping strands. As a beginner whip maker, I was always so obsessed on knowing exactly where I needed to drop a strand, and I would almost be fanatic about it. I would get my ruler out or whatever, I'd get my tape measure, make notes every time I dropped the strand at 13.2 inches or what have you. Whereas the more realistic approach, and what I've learned, is that going by the measurements that I initially was telling you, so for a 6-foot whip, the first belly needs to be 2 feet, the next needs to extend to 4 feet, and then 6 feet for the overlay. The way that I approach this concept now is that here's a braided layer. I'm starting at 8 plait and I'm finishing in 4 plait. How can I go from 8 to 4 strands in such a fashion that the taper will be just as good as it will be? So how can I time those dropped strands? So I don't really look at it anymore as, okay, there's where I'm going to drop the strand. It's more so, how do the strands feel? How much more do I have to plait before I arrive at that first 2 feet, which makes up the first belly? So I am going to tell you in this video, I'm going to measure it exactly for you, but my point is that it's so important to just kind of recognize, teach yourself to recognize where we need to drop the first strand, the second strand, the third strand. Where to drop the first strand will be pretty self-explanatory because we're dropping it right where the BB's end. But for the rest of those strands, try to get in that mindset. 2 feet. Where am I at? If I drop that strand now, will it be too thin towards the end? Just really try to focus on going from big to small. From big to small, 8 plait to 4 plait within 2 feet. Really focus on that. Practice. It'll come quicker than you think it will. So now we can zoom in a little bit. We're still in 8 plait, under 2 over 2, and the BBs are coming up to a close. They're coming to a close. Right about there. The BBs are over. And we're going to drop one of our 2 shortest strands. We'll have 2 that are the same length on the left and the right. Maybe because I'm right-handed, but I've kind of become accustomed to dropping my first strand from the right side. Doesn't matter. And there we go. This is the shortest strand from the right side. Giving it a swift pull and dropping it into the core. Now that strand just became our core. See that? The sinker cord's done. And this became our new core. When Adam visited in August of last year, something that I saw him doing is he was always taking measurements. He had a picture in his mind of where he was, but he was confirming that with a tape measure. And he was saying, okay, this belly needs to end around this point. I thought that was a really good practice, to always be in the habit of just taking an overall measurement and seeing where you are within that mini whip. Each belly is like its own little overlay, its own little mini project, if you will. Kind of the way I look at it nowadays. But I was really inspired at how much Adam was making measurements like that. I think it's a good habit to get into. If you start to look at each belly as its own whip and not worry so much about where you're dropping that first strand, it'll really help you in your overall ability to make whips, I think. So I'm going to take a measurement here, and I want to see how we're doing. So we're looking at about 1 foot 8 inches. So that means I need to start thinking about wrapping this belly up. So I'm going to drop another strand. Now I'll drop it from the left side. There it is. Swinging it to center stage. And as soon as I do that, I'm going to cut out the previous strand that was our core. And I picked up on this idea from Adam Winrich's stock whip build. Dropping strands into the core and cutting out one of the strands of the core. I really was inspired by that. So now we're 6 plait on the left and the right side. There we go. So under 2 over 1 on the left and the right, 6 plait with 1 core in the middle. So we're reaching the end here. I need to think about ending this thing. So now I'm going to drop the next strand. Now we're back to the right side. Get one more on top of it. divide this thing up. So here it is, the shortest one on my right side, swinging it to center stage, like that. This becomes the new core, and I'm going to cut the previous strand that was our core. There we go. And now on the right side, I'm under 1/1, and on the left side, I'm under 2/1. And then I'm just going to pull that. That looks good. So we're probably coming up to about our 2-foot mark, which should be about where we end this first belly. And don't be in the mindset where it has to be exactly 2 feet. If you go a little bit beyond 2 feet, you can compensate for it on the next belly. You don't have to be perfect with your measurements. Just be in the ballpark. Plus or minus 2 or 3 inches is not going to hurt anything. Now, on the left side, shortest strand on the left side, we're going to be dropping that to the middle. 1 pull, swing it to center stage, and cutting out our previous core strand. That hurt. So now we are temporarily in 4 plait, under 1/1, over a core. But as we near the end, the 2-foot mark is about right here. I'm actually going to cut the middle out. So now, this is something new. Now we are plaiting 4 strands over nothing. And this is something that you saw in the stock whip video. Just like that. And a good way to do it, in my opinion, is to plait it loosely and then just pull with those thumbs. Push down with those thumbs. It's a good way you can get a lot of pressure, because it's kind of hard to do it this way. Yeah. Now I'm just plaiting 4 strands over nothing. I'm about ready to take a measurement here to see where we are. I would imagine that we are at about 2 feet. And that means it's time to end this belly. So, the strand on the very top, I'm just going to swing it over and just half hitch it, just to temporarily hold that in place. I'm going to take a measurement, see where we're at. Let's see where we're at. And that is about 2 feet 2 inches. Braiding stops at 2 feet 2 inches. That's fine. I wanted to carry it out a little bit longer, just so it wouldn't be so abrupt. So, 2 feet 2 inches, I'm going to take some tape, and I'm just going to temporarily wrap this. Excuse the train, we've been having a lot of trains here in the area lately. So this is something that I'm doing new now. This tape here is going to come off once we arrive at this point on our second belly. This is simply a placeholder to hold things in place. I no longer bind or wrap the ends of my bellies with nylon thread, with artificial sinew, with tape. This is just to hold it temporarily. I allow the previous belly to do all of the constricting of the end of the belly. The idea is we are eliminating any kinks or bumps or lumps that could potentially form there as a result of the tension being slightly higher here than, say, 2 or 3 or 4 inches up the whip. So once that is in place, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is this is about the 2-foot mark. I'm just going to take note of the length of my remaining strands. Pretty good. If you notice, the strand lengths we used, they give you quite a bit of slack. So if you're really worried about wasting parachute cord, you might want to do this build and then make notes as you go to adjust your lengths for future builds. So I'm going to space this out about every 5 inches. I'm going to snip a strand in a staggered form. I'm going to snip another strand 5 inches down, and then another 5 inches down. I'm going to snip another strand. And this is the tapering of the tails of that belly. So let's take this thing out of the clamp. So here is our first belly of our 6-foot whip. The next thing we're going to do before we roll it is we're going to put it back in the clamp, and we're going to introduce the tape and binding on our first belly. All right, well, we've got this whip in the clamp. The temperature has actually gone up about 3 degrees, and as you can hear, it's made such a difference with those spring peeper frogs. It's amazing. All right, I'm going to take some hockey tape now, and I'm going to wrap a spiral around the transition of this whip. This is something that I'm doing. I haven't really changed anything here, so I'm finding where exactly by just kind of touching with my fingers and bending very lightly so we can see the steel ends right here. So an inch above where that steel ends, I'm going to start some hockey tape, and I'm just going to wrap this in a spiraled fashion. And I want this first wrapping to be about 6 inches down the whip. That's about 6 inches right there. I'm going to cut it. Now what this is doing, if you've watched my previous videos, is it is creating a layer for us to bind over so that the thread or artificial sinew or whatever you use doesn't go through, slip through the cracks. So it's a netting, a surface for us to bind upon. Now here's something that's new. I am no longer using artificial sinew to bind the transitions of my whips. And the reason for that is, as I reach over here real quick and grab some nylon thread, the reason for that is because after time I found that this artificial sinew stretches a little bit. Maybe when it heats up after use, it stretches a bit, and you tend to lose some of your springiness as the years go on in the transition of your whip. Every now and then I will still resort back to my artificial sinew, but that's more so just to build up a little bit of diameter if that's what I'm wanting. I'm wanting a little more bulk, a little more thickness to the transition of the whip. Then I'll resort back to the sinew. But for the most part, I'm strictly using this. So this is number 2 sized crocheting thread or quilting thread, nylon. You can find this stuff. This is actually Hobby Lobby's brand, Artiste. But there's a link in the description to where you can get some of this stuff. And I found that it works really nicely. I'm just going to crack open this fresh spool here. Okay, so I've got my nylon thread here, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to spiral down and spiral up. So as I go down, I'm going to be doing what you've seen me do before. I'm just going to get this little thread out of the way here. As I work my way down, I'm just doing this crisscross pattern like this. And I found that I can get the transitions a lot tighter with this nylon thread. So I'm going to go down and up 3 times. So for this first belly, I'm only going to go down about this far. That's about 3 inches there. So now I'm going to turn around, and remember, if you've seen the previous videos I've done, I'm filling in those gaps that I haven't been before. And this is going to give a lot of constriction to this area of the whip. All the way up there to the top. And now I'm coming back down again. But the only time I'm doing the crisscross pattern that you saw me do is when I'm blazing a new trail of where there has never been any thread before. So if there's already thread there, I'm just kind of filling in the little spaces that I haven't been before. So now, as you can see, I've reached a new point, so I'm going to be blazing a trail. Just like this. My binding is feeling good here. So just before I reach the end of that tape, I'm going to go up again to the top. And this is just giving multiple passes. My whip is coming out of the clamp there. Tighten that back up. There we go. All the way back up to the top. And this is just the first belly here. There's going to be one more belly, but you can already see how stiff that is. Look at that. See that? We're just doing our best here to fill in where we haven't already been. Some people like a really stiff transition. I don't like it that stiff. I like it to be springy. I like it to have a lot of life, but if you are wanting to achieve a whip that has an exceptionally stiff transition, so see now we're blazing a trail again, so we're going back into the crisscross pattern. If you want something really stiff, you can actually take the nylon thread and do a very tight pattern across the transition. And I'll show you what we're doing is we are continuing past the tape for a few inches here. And the idea is we want to taper off that rigidity. That's something that I've talked about, tapered rigidity. You may have heard me reference that term from time to time on this channel. And that's basically what we're doing here. Now I'm just lightening up my wrapping a little bit. Every wrap is a little bit lighter than the one before. So we just fade out that energy, or that tension, I should say. And now we're going to come back up to the top again. Sometimes these spools will do that, and you may have to hold on to it, unravel it, and then wrap it back up. You can see it's doing all this crazy stuff. That's something that's a little troubling sometimes about the nylon thread. It doesn't stick on itself like the sinew does, so sometimes you got to deal with some weird stuff. But it's okay. It feels all right. So see, now I'm going back up. I'm increasing my tension as I climb back up to the top there. There we go. Filling in the best I can where I haven't been before. See that? Okay, up we go, up we go. Ooh. There we go. Back up to the top. And now once I get to the top, I'm going to tie this off with something that you've seen done many a times on this channel. And I have to give props to Bernie Wojcicki of EM Brand Whips. God bless him. Passed away a few years ago, and he was the one who really started it all for me. He's kind of the father of whip making tutorials, as many people have. He was a good man. Never got to meet him, but he was the one who did this little loop there. He didn't invent it, but I always, whenever I do it, I think of Bernie because he was the first one I ever saw do it. So I'm going to wrap this about 4 or 5 times. I'll hold this with my left hand there, and I'm going to cut it, slip it through the eye, and now I can pull this just like that, cut off the excess. And see, you don't even have to cut off. I remember I used to cut off, all right, snip a piece off of your sinew and then take that. It's like, you don't even have to do that. Just like take your spool. You don't have to cut anything off your spool. Don't waste. So there we go. See how stiff that is? This is the first belly of 2. We're going to do the same thing to the second belly, but if it's already that stiff, you can imagine what you can do with this nylon thread. So I'm about ready to roll this first belly of the whip, and we'll talk a little bit about the whip's curve and what gives a whip its curve. All right, well, I've just given this whip a roll. As you can see, I've bound the top of the handle there so that in the end, our heel knot foundation has something firm to hold on to and this thing is not spinning on us at all. It's really important that we do that for every belly and the overlay. I want to talk a little bit about the preferred direction of flow. In other words, the whip has a natural curve to it when you add this binding to it. And a lot of people ask me what causes that. So as you can see, this is how the whip was in the clamp while we were doing our binding with the nylon thread. And the top is where we were doing those crisscross X's all the way down, up, down, and up 3 times, and filling in the spaces where we hadn't been before, as I mentioned, as I was working on it. If we flip it over, this was the underside while we were doing that. And you can see there's all these open loops there. There isn't as much surface area. There aren't as many overlapping nylon thread strands going over each other. So it would make sense that this side would be tighter and this side would be more loose. And that's exactly what's going on. The underside is the looser side with less tension. So it's going to give way, it's going to curve, and that's how we have that natural curving going on. And the part that has more X's on it, more thread on thread, is going to be stiffer. And that's what gives the binding that little curve to it. Now what we could do is I could pop this whip right back in the clamp and we could just keep on reinforcing that curve for both bellies and the overlay. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually flip the whip over. So in other words, I don't want it to be extremely curvy this way and then extremely stiff this way. I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to change the direction of the curve. And the reason that I'm doing it this way is because I like that natural curve, but I don't like it to be so severe that when I roll the whip out, it's actually pointing upward. I don't like whips that do that. I like it to be more ideal for being able to crack both ways. So if you're doing the volley, if you're doing a lot of change in directions, this way of doing the binding is more ideal. In addition to that, we'll talk about the plaiting. Normally, the portion of the whip that is tighter is the top as you're plaiting. So the back side, the loops are a little bit bigger. It's the same principle. There's more surface tension on the top than there is on the back. So when you roll it out and things even out as much as they can, the top is always going to be the inner portion of that loop when you roll the whip out. So one more time, this is how the whip was just a few moments ago while we were doing the binding. We rolled it. Now I'm flipping it upside down so that this was the previous underside while we were doing the binding. And to establish the beginning of that direction change in the curve, I'm going to grab some nylon thread. This is white so you can just see it a little bit better. And I'm going to just start off just doing a few X's. And that's just to establish the new direction of flow. We're not going to do this the whole way. It's just to get things started. It's worth mentioning that some people really enjoy a very, very firm transition on a whip. If you wanted to do that, what you could do is take your thread and do these really, really close wraps like this. Almost end to end. Actually, it would be end to end. And you could do this all the way up to the top, and that creates tremendous tension, tremendous stiffness. But this is a shorter 6-foot whip, and I don't need a transition that's that strong. If the whip was 12 feet, then I would be more likely to do that, but I don't feel that is necessary. So we're just going to go down. Now see I'm coming back up, filling in those spaces. And this is just to establish the new change in direction. And it just builds up a little bit of thickness also. So back up to the top. Now I can grab my thread again, and I'm going to be tying this off. 4 little wraps. And up it goes. Pulling it through. And now we've established the change in direction. So now we can tie on our second belly and begin plaiting. Okay, I have the strands cut for my second belly. Once again, they are right here for you and in the description as well. So this is going to be a 10 plait second belly. Nothing has changed as far as the plait count goes for a 6-foot whip. Have the whip and the clamp, making sure that this is centered in the clamp. Looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and tie this on. I'm going to take any of my 3 strands. We're just doing this the same way that we did with the first belly. Nothing's changed here. Once again, my middles of the strands are the exact middles, no staggering going on. Taking my remaining 2 strands, finding the ends, and I'm going to feed them through a little eye there. Like that. And pulling that shut. Now I'm going to find the middles of those strands as indicated by the knots. And they'll stop us automatically. There's the first middle and shorty. There's the second. Okay. So, something that you can do if you're unsure of where your steel is, you can take a little neodymium magnet, I don't know how to pronounce that, and you can actually find exactly where the handle begins. So remember, we want to make sure that every belly starts a little bit before, a little bit above the steel, so that when we cut everything off at the end, we won't have to cut any steel. So just holding the magnet here and letting it go, see how it just kind of slips into place? That means the steel starts right there. So we just want to make sure we start the belly a little bit above that. But to get it started, I'm just going to start it right here. So here we go. Starting with the upper right, around the back, under 3 over 2, 10 plait. There must be a road closed or something, because I have never in my life seen this much traffic coming down this road behind me. So I apologize for the noise. Hopefully it's not too unbearable. It's obnoxious though for me. Alright, so there we have the first belly. It's unreal. So there's the first belly materializing. At this point, I'm going to take everything and slide it up here to about 1/2 inch above that steel. And we can take our little magnet and double check ourselves. You can see the steel starts about right there. So we're in good shape. Under 3 over 2, 10 plait. I'm just going to get this established by pulling lightly, pulling firmly, and then I'll start to tighten things down as we go. And then we'll be going back into the 2-strand together for the handle to expedite the process. So now I'm starting to really pull things tight. There we go. And now the next one. Really tight. There we go. It's almost time to go into our 2-strand stuff here. One more, and we'll get on with it. Big pull. Now I'm going to finish up this handle by taking 2 strands together around the back, under 3 over 3. And we're just going to keep that up all the way until we get to the binding at the transition. I'll meet you there. Okay, so we've reached 1 inch before the steel ends, and we are ready to go from our herringbone 2-strand under 3 over 2 directly into a single strand diamond pattern. We're doing the same thing for the second belly. Once again, the idea is that a diamond plait, there's a lot more surface area, a lot more strands touching strands, and there's an overall stiffer plaiting pattern. So starting with the upper left around the back, this time we're going to go, because it's an odd number, we're going to be going over 1, under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1. Whenever there's an odd number of strands and you're doing the single strand diamond, you're always starting by going over. Pulling that strand around the back, and then we're going over, under, and over. There we go. And I'm going to keep this up and go about twice as far as I did for the previous belly with the diamond pattern. Another thing you'll want to have on hand during the second belly plaiting is a permanent marker, or a marker that you can write on the surface of the whip. The reason we're going to do that is because once we work our way down, I'm actually going to mark where the tape ends, and I'm also going to be marking where the binding of the nylon thread ends. That way we have something to reference. And once we're doing the binding on the second belly, we can make sure that we're not stopping the tape directly on the previous place the tape stopped. We want to carry everything down at least 1.5 times. So when I come through with the tape on this belly, I'm probably going to carry it down to about here. And then likewise with the binding, I'm going to carry the binding back down to here. So have this on hand. This is one of these little Sharpie permanent, like one of those silver metallic markers. So I'm just going to continue this diamond pattern, and I'll catch back up with you momentarily. All right, so I have carried out this 10 plait single strand diamond pattern for roughly twice what I did on the first belly, and it's time to go right in to our single strand herringbone pattern. So strand on the surface here points to the upper right. I'm going to go around the back under 3 over 2 for an even 10 plait. Upper left coming around under 3 over 2. I'm making sure that I have my my Sharpie marker handy, because I'm getting ready to mark on the belly itself. Once I reach the end of this tape here, I'm going to mark that so that I know where the end of the tape is while I'm binding this belly. So that feels pretty good. It's a lot chillier now than it was during the day. Cold front has come through, so I see my breath. Spring has really been taking a while. Can't wait till it's 80 degrees and hot and muggy. I love that kind of weather. Frogs are really loving this moisture. You can hear it's beautiful. I love that sound. Okay, so that's looking good. And as you can see, we are nearing the end of the tape. We just have a little bit left to go. Right there. And now, that's the end. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my Sharpie marker, and I'm just going to draw a little line there. Make it a little T for tape. And now we can keep plaiting past that. We're starting to run a little bit short here on the right strand. We'll keep that in mind. That's probably going to be the strand that we're going to be dropping first. Those frogs are getting louder by the second. It's funny with those spring peeper frogs, if you go on a run late at night while they're out, if one frog stops, the rest of them stop. It's like they all kind of communicate with each other, and it's fascinating. One will start chirping, and then pretty soon they all start chirping again. Even if a deer or a raccoon walks by and makes some noise, they all quiet down suddenly. It's amazing how in tune they are with their surroundings. So this is going to be the first strand that we're dropping, and I'm not going to be dropping it into the core because I have a belly underneath. We won't be doing that until we reach the end of the first belly, and we're not there yet. So I'm just going to be dropping it on the top right, and you'll see exactly what I mean by that in just a second. So here we go, and now I'm dropping this strand. So I give it one last tug, and that's its final resting place. Every pretend it isn't even there, and the strand underneath it becomes the working strand. So points to the upper right. This one doesn't count anymore because we just dropped it. Around the back, under 3 over 2 on the left, and on the right side we are under 2 over 2. And now we'll give this one last pass. It's going to be a little short, that's all right. I got my little pliers here to help me pull it, get a grip on it. There we go. So we want this belly to reach approximately 4 feet in length before we end the braiding in 4 strands. And that's an approximation, about 4 feet. If it's a little more or a little less, we're not overly concerned about that. If your handle's longer than 10 inches, if it's a 15-inch handle, you need to take that into account. Meaning that the first belly should extend a little bit further than a third if the handle is 15 inches long. So there's the final resting place of that strand. We're going to give it one little pull here with our pliers. Whoops. Like that. And now we're in an even 8 plait, under 2 over 2 on the left and the right side. That feels pretty good. Alright. And now we're coming up to the end of our binding right here. It's hard to see because I used red thread, but we do want to also mark that with our marker so that we can know where that is when we're binding this. We're going to carry the tape a few inches past the first layer on the first belly, and we're also going to carry that binding beyond the first belly's binding when we bind this second belly. And dropping strands once again. I'm dropping strands when I feel like I need to drop strands. I'm paying attention to how things look here. If it starts to look a little crowded, I might drop a strand. Now there's still plenty of space. There's plenty of meat to this belly underneath. So I don't need to worry about dropping a strand yet. Still have plenty to go. I'm not even to the 2-foot mark yet. So we can wait that out. I just ordered myself a couple nights ago a discus launch glider, radio controlled airplane, a glider. And you launch it by holding pegs on the end of the wing, and you swing around and you fling it into the air. And it uses thermals, or rising heat on a hot summer day, to soar. You can gain altitude and keep climbing because of that rising air. So there's a whole art to finding that rising air in the sky. And there are competitions. I ordered a label from the company called Dream Flight in California. That's a cheaper one. It was about $130 for the glider itself, as opposed to the more expensive gliders made by companies like Armsoar. The other company was Vladimir's models. Some beautiful all carbon fiber $700 models. I just couldn't justify it. But I'm looking forward to flying that thing. So here we are. We're coming up to the 2-foot mark, and we're getting ready to slide this tape down. And there's a little trick I'm going to show you. It's something that I do new now on my whip builds, since I'm not binding the ends of the bellies. So I'm going to slide this up so you have a better view of what I'm doing. Zoom in a little bit. Batman! Batman! What do you do? You know, you got to drive around and yell Batman. When somebody drives by and says Batman, you got to reciprocate. What else are you going to do during a pandemic? This quarantine is getting to all of us. Okay. Anyways, so here we are. We've arrived at the end of the first belly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to make a little incision here. So that allows us to peel this tape like that. And what this tape is going to do is it's going to hold all these strands together while we plait. So as we plait our way down, we're going to slide this down. Like that. See that? And just move it out of our way. We'll plait a little bit and we'll move it down as we need. Just like that. So we're still in 8 plait, and I'm going to continue this. That was funny. That was a random occasion of the night right there. I love stuff like that. So we need to start thinking about dropping a strand here. Not quite yet. Once we get about here, I'm probably going to drop a strand from the right side. I'm just going to take a quick measurement here. There we go. So 2 feet, 2 inches. We still have another 2 feet to go on this second belly. And we're on schedule. And I'll continue to put the marks on screen where I am dropping these strands so you guys can follow along. So here we are. See, we're getting a little close to this tape. I'm just going to move it down. And there's another way that we could do this. A lot of leather whip makers will hold those tails with their hand, and they'll actually plait like this, you know, pull it around and keep switching hands. But I didn't learn to do it that way. That way is probably more efficient, and if you can do it, you'll probably be a little bit faster. But I never learned to do it that way, so I use my little tape to constrict my strands while I plait. It just works for me. So if you're watching this video right now, we are in a pandemic. I don't know when or who is watching this video. Maybe it's 10 years into the future, but we're dealing with the COVID-19, the coronavirus. And it's pretty wild, to say the least. It's very sad. It's just a strange time. Anyway, on to more positive things to think about, and that is that we are about ready to drop a strand. So we're still under 2/2. I'm going to make a quick adjustment here so you guys can see. As soon as we reach the end of this strand here, we're going to drop a strand into the core. And now, since we're plaiting over loose tails, we're going to be doing so. We're going to be dropping strands into the core until further notice. I've really been enjoying the birds, photographing them. They have a way of calming you. Yeah, people joke about it, you know, bird watching. There's a lot of jokes about it, but there's a reason people do it. There's a reason that people love it so much. And I've been really enjoying it. I've been watching videos from this lady named Leslie the Bird Nerd is what she goes by on YouTube. There's a link right up there. You can check out her page. Wonderful, informative videos about birds, about their habits, their calls, identifying birds. And I've learned a lot from her, Leslie. Check her out. Good stuff. All right, so we have arrived. And here it is on the right side. I'll move things up a little bit. On the right side, pulling the strand underneath it. One swift pull on the strand, we're dropping it, and pulling it underneath, swinging it to center stage. And now we're going to be cutting one of the strands out of the middle, and I'm going to cut the shortest strand out of the core because this dropped strand is about to take its place. Got a little magnet stuck to my scissors there. Okay. Now on the right side, we're going under 2/1, and on the left side, we're going under 2/2. And what I like to do at this point is I like to pull off that tape, and I like to attach either some more tape or just a couple little wraps of this sinew to just constrict things and hold things in place for me, so I'm not getting my strands confused. Something that you can do that'll help you with this is you can use different colored paracord for your bellies, but not too drastic. I don't advise doing like black over white or neon pink over something dark. So keep your tones similar, because if you're starting out with whip making, you will probably have some little spaces and gaps in your plaiting here and there. And if you have bright on dark or dark on bright, it'll make that even more noticeable. So I haven't decided yet what the color is for the overlay of this whip. I'm thinking of doing like a nice yellow maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. Okay, so here's the strand that we dropped into the core. And I actually made this too tight. There we go. Now pull this down. Perfect. Very good. So under 2/2 on the left, under 2/1 on the right. And just before I drop another strand from the left, I'm going to be cutting the shortest strand out of the core. And that's just something that I like to do. There really is no black and white answer as to where you should do that. I'm just kind of observing my belly there, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, things need to slim down a little bit now, so I'm actually going to do that now. We're going to be cutting the shortest strand out of the core. This one right here. I'm going to pull it out, and a little snip right there, just like that. So now we just have 2 strands in the core. And pretty soon I'm going to be dropping a strand from the left side, and that will become a core strand. So we are currently at the 34-inch mark. We are in 4 strands on the left and 3 on the right, and we're plaiting over 2 strands in the core. So I am going to very shortly drop a strand from the left, and that strand is going to fill in for the core. I'm actually going to do that just about now. So here's the strand I'm going to be dropping. Let me get one more strand on top of it. At 36 inches, I'm going to drop this next strand, give it a tug over to center stage, and I'm going to be cutting the shortest strand out of the core. And this drop strand from the left side is replacing it. Now we are in 6 plait. 3 strands on the left, 3 strands on the right, under 2 over 1 on both sides. And we're going to continue plaiting. And since I really just have 2 strands to worry about in the core, I can take this off. I don't have to worry about that anymore. There we go. I'm almost ready to snip one of these strands out of the core. And we're going to be plaiting 6 strands over 1 strand in the core. There we go. Continuing down, 36 inches. I'm going to cut the shorter of the 2 strands from the core. And I'm going to continue plaiting that 6 plait under 2 over 1. We're going to carry that on for a little ways. So we have about 1 more foot of plaiting on this belly before we will be ending this belly. And then we'll bind it. We'll roll it. And then it'll be overlay time. And that's always kind of the final stretch, if you will. The checkered flag is waving. The final lap. It feels good, especially once you come off of an intricate handle, maybe a fancy plaited handle, or perhaps a single strand 24 plait diamond handle. Whew, those take a long time. They're very tedious, and by the time you get to the transition, when you're just doing a herringbone pattern single strand, you just feel like you can fly. You can fly down that whip, make some serious ground. It's always a good feeling to get there. Pretty soon I'm going to be dropping this strand, but I'm not going to actually drop it to the core because I already have this single strand in the core that's much longer. So I'd kind of be shooting myself in the foot if I used this and cut this. So we'll just drop it like we did a ways up the whip, where we drop it from the top. At 40 inches, I'm going to drop the shortest strand from the right. So we're going to keep going until now it's on the upper right. There's its final resting place. And now on the left we're under 2 over 1, and on the right we are under 1 over 1. So things are starting to wrap up for this belly. Do 1 more, and at 42 inches we'll drop this strand right here on the left. And the camera across the table, the memory card just filled to capacity, so that camera shut off. So you're stuck with this view only. That's all you really need, though, for this. Okay, so 42-inch mark. This strand is no more. It did its duty. Goodbye, my friend. Now we are in 4 strands, under 1 over 1 on the left and the right. And we are plaiting over 1 strand for the core. There. I'm going to cut out that core strand, and now, just like we did with the first belly, get that out of the way, we are plaiting 4 strands over nothing. And we're going all the way to that 48-inch mark, which is about 4 feet, which is exactly 4 feet actually. And we'll tie this thing off. I'm going to guess that this is the 4-foot mark right here, right off camera, sorry. I'm so confident in that decision that I'm going to actually tie this off with some temporary tape to hold that belly from becoming unraveled. 3 feet there, and there is the 4-foot mark. So just as we did last time, I'm just going to stagger these 4 strands, and they're all nice and long, so I don't have to worry about being picky and choosy about which ones I cut. Let's just splay them out. We'll cut the first one right there, and I'm spacing them out about 5 inches. So next, and again, oops, and here's the last one right there. And these might be fine-tuned later on. We might make this an inch shorter. We can be a little more selective once we have that second belly, but there you have it, guys. The second belly is plaited, and now I'm just going to take this thing back. Just take my pliers, and since these are some shorter strands to begin with, pull them. I'm going to grab my little lighter. Alright, this magnet is trying to steal the show. So I'm going to snip, leaving about 1 millimeter on these strands. Because this is the belly, we can just melt them and press them into that belly. One thing I forgot to do was I forgot to mark where the binding ended. It was right here. I just did that. But it's better to do it while you can still see it so you're more accurate. Don't forget like I did. The camera's distracting me. All right. So there we have it, guys. We have the second belly with a nice single strand diamond plait transition there. It's nice and stiff. And we are about ready to pop this thing back in the clamp and start wrapping with some tape. And we will get on with the binding. We have the whip back in the clamp here in the same orientation that it was just in while we were finishing this second belly. I'm going to grab here some hockey tape, and I'm about ready to lay down 1 spiral of tape, and that layer is going to actually surpass by a few inches where we stopped on the first belly. So once again, you guys know the drill by now. 1 inch above the transition where the steel ends, and I'm going to begin wrapping with this hockey tape. So as you can see, as indicated by our mark here, this is where the tape stopped on the first belly. And just for reference, I'm going to mark that on top too so we can see how much further to go. So I'm going to carry it on this length that we did on the first belly. I'm going to go about half of that, so about 3 or 4 inches. And actually, we're stopping right where we stopped our binding on the first belly. So, as indicated by our little B here for binding, that's where the binding stopped on the first belly. T, that's where the tape stopped on the first belly. So that feels good. At this point, I'm going to take my nylon thread. We're basically going to repeat exactly what we did on the first belly, except this time we're going to go further. But the same down and back 3 times principle applies here. So starting about 1 inch above and doing the whole crisscross thing again. Just like that. It's a beautiful day today, guys. It was 70 today, which is a first in a while. This point of the month, we should be starting to have more 60s and 70s. And for that, I'm very excited. So there we go. At this point, I'm going to turn around and go back up again in just a second. This is about a third. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to go back up again. So that's about 5 inches, 6 inches, about 5 inches. So as I go back up, I'm just filling in the places that I haven't been. Ooh. Every single time we lay down the tape, we want to go down and up, down and up, and then past the tape about 4 inches and back up again. So what we did to the first belly, we're doing to the second, except everything is scaled up. And turning the corner and going back down again. Once again, whenever there is nylon thread already in place underneath where I am wrapping, I'm just doing a spiral. I'm not doing the crisscross. So as you can see here, we'll zoom in. Now that I am entering a point of where I have not been before, we immediately go into the crisscross pattern. Like that. As you can see, we are currently surpassing where the tape stopped on the first belly. That's important. So our next down motion, we want it to be about double what the first one was. Right about there. Whoops. And back up again. Spiraling, filling in where I haven't been before. So there we go. Almost up to the top. Up to the top again. And now coming back down for the final time. Doing my best to just kind of scope out where I haven't been before. It's not perfect, but I'm just kind of, it's kind of like when you're, I don't know if you've ever been running through an area of a bunch of little rocks or something where you have to step exactly on a rock. There's a certain path that you can take, and you can run through it quickly, and your brain is making all these decisions all at once of where, without even really knowing it, of where your foot needs to go. Same for this thing. You can just quickly glance at these spaces, and your brain will just kind of be like, okay, I need to go there. Yeah, I need to just go there, somewhere in there. Long story short, what I'm trying to say, and failing so horribly, is that do your best to fill things in. It's not an exact science. So now, down here, I'll zoom out because I know I'll be out of the frame soon. And yes, I'm wearing flip-flops with socks. And now, blazing a new trail. So I'm doing the crisscross pattern once again. Now, as indicated by here, that's where the binding stopped on the first belly. So we're going to pass that up. We're going to pass that up. I'm still wrapping fairly tightly here. But as I work my way down, just as I did on the first belly, I'm starting to ease up on the tension. And I'm starting to ease up. Lightly, more delicate, until I'm just almost letting the weight of the roll itself do the binding for me. So you can see how long that is. And then back up again. Back up again. Finger tight. Slowly increasing the pressure. Slowly increasing the pressure. Filling in spaces where I haven't been before. This thing's giving me trouble, guys. It's giving me trouble. I gotta get out of this. Let go. We're stuck. Just like that, increasing the tension as we ascend. Now we're back over the tape. There we are. Up we go. Up we go to the top, filling in the spaces we haven't been before. How many times am I going to say that? Okay. All the way to the top. I'm going to grab my artificial sinew and tie this off. And we're going to do something for this whip. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. If we wanted to achieve an extremely tight transition, this is what we would do. And I do this on some of my longer whips that have 2 bellies, as well as some of my whips with 3 plaited bellies. All right, so I'm going to start just like I did with this binding here. And it's going to look like I'm about ready to go into the crisscross pattern, but I'm not. I'm going to zoom in extra close, like that. And I am actually wrapping this nylon thread end on end, meaning that every wrap is touching the side, the edges of the previous wrap. There is so much surface area covered here by this wrap that you will find that doing this creates a lot of tension, a lot of springiness to your whips. Now this is a 6-foot whip, so I kind of feel like this is overkill to do this, personally. I'm not going to do it very far, but I'm just doing it to show you. As you can see, I'm getting a little bit sloppy in there. But the idea is to have each wrap touching the sides of the previous wrap. I'm not doing a great job of showing this. Sorry, but I hope you get the idea. And that's all I'm going to do. I just wanted to show you what you could do. You could carry this on for as long as you wanted. You could carry it for 4 inches, 5 inches. And as you go, what I would recommend doing is, each wrap is a little bit lighter than the previous one. But this is common coming right off the handle. Where the steel ends and the BBs begin, this is a wrapping procedure that you could do to really strengthen your whips. And now I'm just gonna call that good. See that? You can already tell, like that, just that much. It is a lot stiffer. So through we go, through the loop, and pulling that, cutting this. As you can see, before I started binding this belly, I wrapped very heavily the top here of our second belly. And once again, that's just to reinforce a good, strong surface and strong bound layers for our heel knot foundation to be stapled into so it never slides off. So this whip is at this point ready to roll. And then we'll get on with the overlay, and this thing will be just about done. All right, so I have all of my overlay strands cut and ready to go right here. And as you can see, if you look up here, I have them color coordinated for you guys. So if you want to follow along this pattern, you can do so. So what I'm going to do is I want these to be sort of separated, these 2 tones. I want them to be separated by this single white strand. Once again, what I've done, all these strands you see up here, I've split them all in the middle. So I've either indicated the middle by tying a knot, or I've indicated the middle by just cutting the strands in half, pulling the guts out, and then fusing them back together, as you can see, just like that. And I had some of this paracord lying around, so I figured I would use it up. This is 550 parachute cord. Some people were asking about the strand lengths on my website, whether or not those were designed for 650 or 550 parachute cord. They were originally designed for 550 parachute cord, and you can use it with 650. What's going to happen if you use 650 with those strand lengths is you're going to get a little bit of extra, maybe 6 inches of waste. So you can make the adjustments as you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all 4 of my solid green strands here. I have 4 of them. I'm going to find the middles. I've already done that pretty much, but I'm going to pull them to where they're readily accessible like that. And then I'm going to tie these on just like that. Nothing is changed here as far as tying on an overlay, with the exception of we are going to push this to where all the bellies start, which is about an inch above where the steel begins. And to repeat myself once again, that's so we don't have to cut any metal in the end. So I'm going to take my remaining strands here, and you can see that I have all of the middles indicated on these as well, so I can go ahead and let go of those middles and find the ends. And I'll show you how we're going to set this up. I like the idea of having that white strand kind of separating the bright green from the darker vegetation green. We're going to do that like this. I'm going to have my 3 bright strands on top and the white one on the bottom. And we're just going to open up that eye and slide them through like that. Once they're in, close that eye up, and then I'm feeling around the back here, making sure that all those middles are resting directly behind here, as we've always done. I have to shift things around just a little bit, but it's pretty close to the way things are going to be, except for the white goes in between. So, and now I'm pulling all of these tree frog green cords until we are stopped by the middle. There's a middle there. There's a middle. Beautiful rain is coming down right now. I just love it. Here comes the 4th strand. There's the middle right there. So you see what we're doing? We just kind of have that nice little, not a gradient, but just a variation of greens separated by a nice, strong, solid white. And I like that. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to establish the beginning of my 2-strand diamond pattern first, and once I get that established, we'll push things up and we'll settle it into where it's going to be resting forever. So I'm taking 2 strands. These strands on the surface are pointing the upper right. We'll start with the upper right. Nothing's changed here. We're just starting a diamond plait. 2-strand side-by-side diamond. Around the back. Under 2. And I'm just going to try to maintain this this pattern you see here. It's always a little tricky to begin with. Under these 2, over 2, under 2, and over 2. And this is just something, I'm doing this color scheme, just something extra, something fun. It's a lot easier if you have a solid color, as you are well aware. Now we're going to go again, taking those 2 strands, under 2, over 2, oops, yeah, under these 2, over, under these 2, and over those 2. Now we go with these guys around the back, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. Keep stepping on my strands. That's why I'm doing like a little square dancing going on here. I keep having to lift my feet up. There we go. And around the back again. We'll do one more pass right here, and then we'll slide everything up to where it needs to go. Under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. There we go. And I'm going to slide this up to the beginning. Up to the top there, we can continue this pattern. Under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2. Let me show you what came in the mail today. There she is. I test flew it a couple times. Still kind of evening things out, and got a lot to learn with them, but I'm looking forward to a nice hot summer day where I can do some soaring. So now I'm really going to make sure that the whip is in the clamp nice and tight. Make sure that's nice and tight. This is nice and tight. Everything's nice and tight. And here's where I'm starting to really pull my strands kind of individually to really lock them into place initially. See that? Look at that. There's another one. And now we can work on this side here. Ooh, I really like those colors. So all that is that tree frog green. It's kind of an iridescent, glowy kind of look, and what's going on is it's lime green with some embedded single strands of looks like royal blue. It just gives it this really beautiful shine to it almost. Bet that'd look cool under a black light. So there we have it. I've begun this I've begun this 2-strand diamond pattern. I'm going to continue this all the way down until we get to the binding here. Once we reach the binding about an inch before the steel ends, we're going to rapidly transition into a herringbone plait or a whipmaker's plait. So I will meet you here. All right, as you can see, we have arrived at 1 inch before the steel ends. Now, I want to make a quick mention that some whipmakers prefer to continue their diamond plait all the way up until the very end of that steel. But I like to do so. I like to switch over to the herringbone plait an inch before that steel ends. Just the way I've always done it, the way I feel comfortable doing it. Taking a look at my strands, and it looks like we have maintained that little separation. The white separating those two different shades of green. As you can see, I have 2 tree frog greens on the bottom, the white there, and then 4 regular greens. So let's go straight into it. The strands on the surface here point to the upper right, around the back, under 4, over 4. This is a 16 plait. And once again, this is the transition. So I want to make sure that I'm paying extra careful attention to the tension that I am pulling these strands at. Under 4, over 4 on the left and right side. And I will meet back up with you momentarily. I'm just gonna go on through with it. And we do have some strands that are starting to get a little bit short. So pretty soon we'll be dropping a strand from the right side first. And I'll be taking a measurement for you guys where I drop the first strand. But keep in mind, I don't want you guys to say, oh, he dropped it there, so you drop it there every time. It's not really how this works. It's not really how this works. Every whip is a little different. Okay, it's time to drop the first strands of the overlay. I really am happy with what's going on here, guys, so I want to maintain it, meaning that I'm going to be dropping 2 strands at the same time to keep this little chevron pattern that we have going here. I want everything to maintain balance. 17 inches, we're going to drop our very first 2 strands at the same time. So the way we're going to do that is, here they are. Zoom in for you. These are my 2 strands here. See the fraying going on? I don't know what's causing that. I think it's the humidity. Humidity is like 100%. I took the lighter and just melted the end so it wouldn't fray any further. So anyway, 2 strands we're dropping are on the bottom. So I'm going to continue plaiting as if nothing is about to take place momentarily. And once I've established at least 2 strands on top of those strands that we're going to drop, and right now I'm in under 4/4. Nothing's changed in what I'm about to do, really. Dropping 2 strands at the same time. So let's see. We got 3 strands underneath it. This is the one we're dropping. Pulling everything there in a second. And we'll get 1 more on top of this one too. And I like to just go through, pull the strand we're going to be dropping, and the 3 underneath it. Same with the left side, pull the strand we're going to be dropping, and the 3 underneath it. And then we're going to just one at a time swing these little strands to the center. And I'm not going to pull hard yet. I'm just pulling with enough force to get them to the middle. Like that. Maybe you can cross them too if you want to. Temporarily cross them. You don't want to have them stay crossed, otherwise there'll be a little bump there in your whip. Now we're under 4/3 on the left and the right side. I'm going to have to uncross them very soon here because we're about ready to pass them up. So there we go. Leaving these tails here. I'm not going to cut anything yet because I want to have a lot of strands on top of those 2 strands before I pull them or anything. Otherwise we'll see those very noticeable spots. The strand will sag and get pulled underneath the others if we don't wait and establish some tension on top of these 2 strands that we're dropping at the same time. So both sides under 4/3. Under 4/3. There we go. And we're getting ready to give both of them a little tug. There we go. And I think at this juncture, we can go ahead and give them a little pull. There's 1. And there's 2. Perfect. And then the one right below it is this strand. So you can't even really tell that anything dropped there. I'm happy with the tension that I just gave these. 1 more little pull on the left strand. Perfect. And now we can come through at an angle. I'm going to come through and trim these 2 strands. This is something very important that I'm not sure if I mentioned on my previous current method video a couple of years ago, but always when you're about ready to melt and push 2 strands into the core, never let them catch fire, and don't let that fire touch your thread, because if that happens, it'll melt your nylon thread and a lot of the tension will loosen up. You don't want that to happen. You spend all that time binding that part of the whip. Let the flame go out first and then press it into the core as not to melt and ultimately cut that nylon spiraling that you did. So now we can proceed in a 14 plait, even 14 plait, and we've maintained this neat little chevron pattern that we have going. I didn't want to interrupt that. I like it. I want to carry it on further. Maybe till the end. We'll see how we feel. And now I'm just carrying on. Carry on. Now another thing I'm going to mention right now, it's nothing new, but it's something I feel like I haven't mentioned a lot in my previous videos, and there's a reason I just zoomed out. Every now and then, if you can, every 6 inches or so, maybe even a foot or 6 inches, do what I'm doing right now. Untangle, because if you keep going, it's going to give you a big old knot that you don't want to have to deal with. I made a few 15-foot whips, and I think it was when I was first starting to make whips the first 3 years, I was working on a 15-foot whip, so excited, so excited. Oh, this is cool, this is going to be great. Before I know it, I'm about 7 feet into the whip on the overlay, and I hadn't at all thought about what goes on down here. What goes on under the whipmaker's bench is a dark thing, unless you keep up with it. And keeping up with it just means every 6 inches to a foot, just free all your strands and keep going, so you don't have a big rat's nest that you have to sit down for 2 or 3 hours and deal with. That's happened to me before, and it's not fun. So take the little time to straighten your strands out. Making sure that's looking okay on the left and the right. I'm happy with that. And we're going to continue. And not too long from now, we're going to have a couple more strands to drop. And I'm going to keep on plaiting, and I'll meet you there. Plaiting. I haven't slipped like that in a while. Forgive me. Okay, we have come to the point where we are once again running out of strands on the left and on the right. I'm going to keep this pattern going, so I'm going to drop 2 strands at the same time once again. If I wasn't worried about maintaining this pattern, I would drop this strand or this strand, and I would carry it around and do it staggered, meaning not all at once, as you've seen many times before on this YouTube channel. And I'm going to take a measurement and let you guys know where I'm dropping these next 2 strands. And we're dropping them at the 2-foot mark, 24 inches. I'm going to do that right now. Look at our strand here. We got 3 strands below it, and on the left side we have this strand that we'll be dropping, and then we have 2 strands below it. So, and here's the one we're dropping on the right. So, giving everything a little tug there. I'm a little bit too close in for you guys, I think. There we go. So, pulling this strand and the 2 below it. And on the right side, this is the strand we're dropping, giving it a tug, and also the 2 strands below it. The 3 strands below it, a tug. There we are. So, we'll start with the right on this side. Drop strand, 1 tug, under the 3, pulling it to center stage. And I'm going to be doing the same thing with the left. Little pull, under those 2, to center stage. Strand on the surface points to the upper left, around the back, under 3 over 3 on the left and the right side. We are now in a 12 plait. 12 plait. That's what I started with, 12 plait. About 8 years ago. Can't believe it's been so long. Doesn't feel like it's been so long. I feel like time's been going by quick. I won't get into that conversation. And there we go. Going to zoom out just a little bit. Once again, building tension by stacking strands on top of these 2 dropped strands before we snug anything up. Making sure this is nice and tight to hold those 2 strands in place. Right in the middle. Making sure everything around the back is uniform. And I think it's about time we give both of these a little tug. And you can see they're slightly raised areas right here. Zoom way up on them. There we go. Watch them shrink. There's 1. promise two. Two drop strands. And now, at this point, we can continue the 12 plait. And then very shortly, we're going to be cutting them in a staggered fashion as to encourage the taper. That's what we're always trying to do with whips, encourage the taper. Encourage the taper in size and in mass. There we go. And I'm happy with that. I'm going to straighten that a little bit around the corner. We had a little twist developing there. Nip that in the bud real quick. And let's go ahead and give these a little snip. I'm going to move to my better pair of scissors if I have them in here. Oh, I sure do. Amazon. All right. So I got a little cut here. And once again, I just trimmed these strands there. And I melted them and pressed them into the belly below. Once again, making careful. Once again, making sure that they did not touch this nylon thread while burning. If there was a flame there, I want to wait till the flame goes out before I press the melted paracord into this core as not to cut the nylon thread, causing unraveling and decrease in tension. We don't want that to happen. So now I am currently in 12 plait, and I'm going to continue that 12 plait until we start to run low on strands. I will see you there. Okay, we have reached the point where we are ready to drop 2 more strands, and I already have them. As you can see, I already have them in the correct orientation, and we're ready to go. So I have the most amount of strands underneath the strands we're going to be dropping. As you can see, here's one over there, and then there's 3 over here on the right side. I could do one more on the left side, but that would cut off the strand that we're dropping. See that? So we're just going to do it the way it is right now. So pulling that right strand, the 3 below it, swinging that strand to the center, and then pulling this one and pulling that one to the center also. And now we are in a 10 plait, under 3/2 on the left and the right side. Under 3/2. And we are still maintaining that chevron pattern. Definitely going to wait on pulling these, because I do not want to have them slide underneath the rest of the strands. Making sure they stay in order there and behave, don't cross over one another. There we go. Under 3/2 12. Oh, excuse me, 10 plait. And now it's time to pull those 2 dropped strands and observe what's going on above. There's 1, and there's 2. Looks good. Let's keep on going for a little ways, an inch or so, and then we'll cut those 2 dropped strands. There we go. I know a lot of you watch these videos for the ASMR value. But I'm curious as to how many of you enjoy the videos for their ASMR qualities. Let me know in the comments. I'm curious. There's one. There's two. We are awfully close there, so I'm going to actually undo those two strands as not to melt my beautiful green overlay. And here's a little melt there. Now we don't have to worry about the binding anymore because it's gone. There we go. I'd like that to be a little flatter. There we go. If you melt these things and then just smash it with your thumb, stick your hand in water first, because as I mentioned in my previous tutorial, I think the skin on at least my thumbs and my fingertips, they're actually desensitized, is a nice way of saying dead nerves from doing that so much. But I just do it quick and then rub my fingers together. But if you're going to do it, you haven't made whips in a while, that hurts if you don't have some resistance isn't the word. If you haven't killed off your skin cells and your fingers, then don't do that. There we go. Now we are in a nice 10 plait. All right. And now I'm just going to keep on plaiting here until the time comes to drop our next couple of strands. And as we progress our way down the whip, I may or may not let this V go. You know, I just might let it go and do it at once, because sometimes it gets difficult to drop two strands at the same time when you're in a lower plait count. It can be easier to have gaps form in those scenarios. But it's doable. It's just can be a little challenging, that's all. So I'm going to keep on plaiting, and I'll meet you at the next drop. Okay, it's time to drop strand number 7 and strand number 8. At 40 inches, we're going to be dropping this next strand. So here it is. And I'm going to let this chevron pattern do what it wants now. We're halfway through the whip, and I'm just going to let things kind of play out. So that being said, here's the strand we're going to drop. Let me get 2 strands on top of it. So here's the strand that we're going to drop, pulling it tight, pulling the 2 tight underneath it, swinging it to the middle, a little lift there to get it in the middle, and there we go. I'm going to plait under 2 over 2 on the right, and temporarily on the left I'm going to be plaiting under 3 over 2 until we drop that next strand here momentarily. There we are. All right. And here's the next strand we're going to be dropping. So give the one that we dropped a pull there. Tug there, you can see it moving. Looks good. And here's the next strand that we're going to be dropping. We won't quite yet cut the strand that we dropped from the right side. So 40 inches, 41 inches is the next strand drop on the left side. And let's accumulate a couple of strands at least on top of it. This one right here. And there we go. And at this juncture, I'm going to go ahead and cut this. Right there. Don't have to worry about nylon thread, so I'll catch that on fire and melt it. push it right into the core underneath. Let me establish one more strand on top there. And then now from the left side, there's 2 strands on top, pulling the one we're going to be dropping, and the 2 underneath it, holding it in place, swinging it to center stage. And now we are in an even 8 plait on the left and the right side, under 2 over 2. And we're going to have this thing done in no time at all. Once you get to 8 plait, of course depending on the length of the whip, but once you get into 8 plait, you start to look at what you already did, and then it's kind of downhill from there as far as plaiting goes, I think. There we go, making sure everything underneath looks okay, and it does. I like that. Now I'm going to give this a little tug. You can see it move and lock into place, and now I can give that a snip and a melt. See if I can close this way. Nope. Okay, even 8 plait. I'm going to continue with this 8 plait until it's time to drop our next couple of strands. I'm going to take a moment here and show you guys a beautiful little insect. This is called a lacewing. And coincidentally, it actually matches the color of our whip here. As you can see, beautiful little wings. Let's see if I can. There you go. There we go. Beautiful rain is starting to pick up a little bit. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but it is just magical. I love rain at night. There's just nothing better. Helps you sleep. Oh, it's just beautiful. I'm a spring and summer guy. I don't know about you guys, but I've never loved winter. I don't think. I've been trying to make the best of it all my life, but I'm just a lot happier when it's warmer and when the days are longer. I feel more alive. I think most people do, but of course there are things to appreciate in winter, if not the sheer fact that the harshness of winter is what makes summer so great. That's a way to think of it. Contrasts. Something I used to be so fascinated in when I was younger, and I still am, but I went through a heavy phase of insects. I just loved to hear a bug, particularly a late August bug like a katydid or a cicada, crickets and what have you, and go find what particular insect was making that sound. Katydids were especially fascinating to me. The true katydid makes a certain type of sound. There's a bush katydid, all these different types. I was very fascinated by it. And just recently, a couple of years ago, these wasps, these solitary wasps that are very docile, they live alone for the most part. They're called cicada killer wasps because they hunt cicadas. And the other type is called a great black wasp, or a Sphex pennsylvanicus wasp. And these things dig holes in the ground, and they dig like dogs. And it's very, very amazing to watch these little insects work. They're so intelligent, very smart. And I decided to start filming time lapses of them digging, videos of them hunting. I even bought a little scope and put it down their hole and got some video of them digging and stuff. And I'm going to be making a documentary. I have all the footage, and I just have to sit down and edit it and tell the story. That's going to be available on my my second YouTube channel. You can find that in the description. But I'm excited about releasing that hopefully this year. So we are still in a 4-plat right now, and we are at the point where we are getting ready to plat over where the previous belly, second belly, ended. So I'm going to pop this tape off here, and I could use that tape and do the whole slide the tape down and use the tape to constrict these last strands so I wouldn't get them confused with these and just hold everything in place. But because of the fact that they're so much brighter and a whole different color, I'm just going to plat over them and not worry about anything. Everything's fine. All is well. There we go. Just going to plat right over those strands. And pretty soon, we're going to be dropping a strand into the core. And all that business starts up again. Once we are braiding a layer of any kind over loose tails, I'm going to be dropping strands into the core, and those strands become the core. Drop into the core, cut a strand out, etc. And that's going to be nice because as we near the end of the whip, we won't have these bright red strands inside the core that are eagerly awaiting their chance to peer through our green. If there ever were to be a crease in this whip, God forbid that happen, or a gap, you would see that red underneath. So it's a good idea to have your final few core strands match, or if not match, have them close in tone to your overlay strands. You can see that little thing peeking out right there. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm going to take a little lighter and just kill it. There we go. That was just a little bit of fuzz there, a little frayed area. And I'm getting ready to drop a strand momentarily. After we take a little measurement here. There we go. All right. As soon as we reach the end here of this strand, we're going to be dropping one of these strands to the core. Go. I'll move everything up a little bit for you guys. You can see this part's starting to get a little bit tedious, but it's nothing you guys cannot manage. Okay, we are still in 8-plat. I'm getting ready to drop a strand from the right side into the core. And I will do so as soon as I reach the end of this shortest strand that is currently making up the core. Just about there. And just a couple more passes and we will be there. Very good. Okay. And at this juncture, I'm going to take this strand from the right side. It is the shortest one. There are currently 2 strands underneath it, giving it a tug and pulling it to the middle like that. In the same motion, I'm cutting out one of those strands of the core, those red strands that were already there. So at this point we should be braiding over a total of 2 strands that are making up that core. So under 2 over 1 on the right side, under 2 over 2 on the left. And this isn't an exact science, guys. You need to remember that. Look at this nasty little fray coming out here. That's from the strand that we just cut. See that? Because it's red like that, it's extremely noticeable. So what we're going to do is we're going to blast it. There we go. Shouldn't be bothering us anymore. Just shriveled up like a dead plant. And there we have it. 2 strands in the core. There we have it. All right, continuing down the whip. You might notice that sometimes when you're in a lower plait count, especially with some of the 650 parachute cord, the strands may want to wrinkle or buckle in the middle into an ugly little fold. And that's just because we're taking these strands. Don't forget to pull that strand that we dropped there. You see it moving down. That's because we're taking these strands and we're making them do things that they don't necessarily want to do all the time. At such a low plait count, we're taking them, making them twist, turn corners. Plaiting is sometimes a torturous little path for a strand. And if it's already flat to begin with, it might not want to do it so easily. So next, I'm going to, once again, drop another strand. Sounds like a duck fight going on across the street. You hear that? I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired. Okay. And now we are going to drop this strand here next. As soon as we do one more pass with it, we're going to be dropping that strand to the core and snipping out the shorter one, which is this green one here. So here's another pass on the one that we're going to be dropping around the side. Very good. And now we can pull it tight and pull it to the center and cut out the previous strand. The only reason I'm cutting the green strand as opposed to the red strand is because it is longer. And I feel more comfortable having that long strand in there, even though it won't be there for too long. So now I am in 6 plait over 2 strands. And realistically, I probably could have cut the red one, but it's not going to be a problem because we're about ready to cut it anyway. So, okay, at 4 feet 9 inches, where we are here, I am going to cut out that remaining strand. I'm going to go ahead and cut the red one just because it's red and want to get rid of it. So now I'm going to be temporarily plaiting 6 plait over a single strand in the middle. And then I will begin dropping more strands to the core. But now from here on out to the end, we will never have more than 1 strand in the core, ever. As a matter of fact, towards the end of the whip, we're going to be having no strands in the core. We're going to be plaiting 4 strands over no core at all, just like we did with the bellies. So I'm continuing on here, and we're nearing the end of the whip. We're getting very close to the end. Here we are at the 5 foot mark. I am going to drop one of my strands to the core. We just have a little bit of that previous core strand left, but it'll be gone in a second. So I'm going to drop this one to the middle here, swinging it to the center, and then to keep what I said true, we do not want to have any places where there are double width strands in the core. So as soon as that starts, I'm cutting it out right there. Sorry about the shadow. There we go. So now on the right side, I'm under 1 over 1. And the left side under 2 over 1. There we go. We're nearing the end. And I'm tired. Another late night. There we go. And I'm going to pull that strand. You'll see it move there. There we go. It is the core now. But not for too long, because we're about ready to drop another strand. So here we are at 5 feet 2 inches. I'm going to grab a strand from the left-hand side, and I'm going to drop that to the core. Once again, that's 5 feet 3 inches. I'm going to be dropping another strand. And here we have arrived at the 5 foot 3 inch mark. I'm going to grab a strand from the left side here, give it a tug, and drop that into the core while simultaneously cutting out our previous core strand. Set that aside. So now we are plaiting 4 plait. Little twist there, you see that? You just get that out with your fingernail. Gently coax it in the direction that it doesn't initially want to go, but it will want to go there. Give it a little wiggle sometimes. It'll go. And then we're going to pull that core strand, lock it in place. And now the last 6 inches of this whip, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be 4 strands over nothing. So once we get to the 5 foot 6 mark, I'm going to cut this bad boy out in the middle, and then we'll be just about to the end. So, getting ready to take a measurement here. Once I feel that I'm about at the 5 foot 6 inch mark, and I'll cut the core out. Yeah, white is it looks beautiful on whips, but the problem with it is it gets dirty so easily. I couldn't resist adding a little bit of white though into this. I think it just makes it just look a little better. So here we come up to the 5 foot 6 inch mark. It's about right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out that core strand. And you guys have had a little bit of practice doing this if you made the stock whips in my earlier tutorial, which demonstrates how to build a stock whip in the Adam Winrich style. So here we are at the end, and let's just go right over it like we did with those bellies. Do that same thing you did for this. And then you'll see a little bit of that core strand likes to stick out just a touch, but if need be, we'll go back and hit it with the lighter, and that'll take care of it. It'll never be seen again. There we go. And I really enjoy ending all of my whips now, with the exception of some really long whips, maybe some 12-footers. I might keep the core in. If somebody's going to be using the whip in the mud, repeatedly cracking it, a cattle rancher perhaps, I will go ahead and keep a core strand in. But for the most part, I'm ending all of my whips in 4 plait over no core. I just love how fine I can get that point. It's just remarkable. I've never been able to do it any other way. And even with a 4-point fall hitch that we're going to be tying, sometimes I'll end it with a twist on request, or if I'm making a stock whip. But for a bullwhip, I'm still using a 4-point fall hitch. It's stronger. That's the trade-off. It's stronger. It is still going to be, even with this coreless finish in 4 plait, it is going to be a little bit thicker. than the tapered twist, but it's a stronger hitch than a tapered twist. Tapered twist cracks like butter and you can't beat it, but it doesn't last as long as a 4-point fall hitch. So, okay, here we are. We've arrived at 6 feet. All that work paid off, guys. If you got to this point, great job. This whip is almost finished. I am now going to tie a 4-point fall hitch. I have here a gutted 4-foot piece of 550 parachute cord. You can also use 650 parachute cord, doesn't really make much of a difference. I've cut one end of the parachute cord at an angle, and I've taken my lighter and I just kind of melted it and rolled it in my fingertips into a nice little point. That way we can feed it into my lacing needle. I get my lacing needles from Jig Pro Shop. This is the micro needle. It's very thin, so it can easily pass through almost any cord, including whipmaker's cord. So now, at the middle, I am feeding the paracord inside of itself. And I learned how to make this type of fall that you're going to be seeing. I do it a little bit differently, but I learned this from Adam Winrich and Dakota Winrich. As a matter of fact, Dakota has a brand new video out on how to make this type of fall. She just started her new YouTube channel, Dakitty Whips. Definitely check it out. It's always fun to see a fellow whipmaker start their own YouTube channel, so give her some views. There's a little card up there, and I don't know if it's on the left or right side. I can't remember where YouTube puts it, but there's a little link to her page. Give her a subscription. So there we have it. Sliding down, as you can see, that little loop is getting smaller and smaller, and we want it to be about like this. See that little loop there? That's what we're looking for, and that is the middle. So if we hold this out, it's about 2 feet long. So we're just going to leave this needle in, and I'm actually going to tie this on the whip as it is right now. And it's going to be a little different from what you've seen, but I think you're going to like it. All right, so we have the whip in the clamp right now. I'm reaching for my fall I just made. I'm going to open up this eye. I don't really have to worry about anything sliding out of place because this needle is still threaded into the end. And I saw Adam Winrich do this when he visited. And he's got just a great little way of doing this fall that I never really thought about. I was actually taking the needle and feeding it halfway through and then unthreading it. Just a few steps that were really unnecessary. Adam's got a much quicker way of doing it. So we have this. Now I'm just going to find the end here and just pull that. And I'm just going to cinch that up a little bit there, just all the way to the top. So that's nice and tight right there behind there. And I'm just going to push that up and just plait maybe 1 or 2 more little strands there just to have everything locked in place nice and tight. Now at this point, I can make sure this is around the back, this loop is tight, and holding it with my finger right there, I'm going to plait 1 more strand just to get it a little bit tighter. Now I like to finish my whips with just a normal fall hitch in 4-plait. So once we are in this orientation, I'm going to take the upper strand here. I'm going to go around the back like that. And nothing has changed, guys, as far as my fall hitches. I'm still doing it the same way. I've been doing it for a while. So not a lot has changed, or nothing has changed really. I'm going to do my next strand below it, right here. Now each time I tie on one of these strands with a half hitch, I'm tying a knot in it just to indicate that I have already tied that strand. I don't want to do 2. I don't want to tie any more times than I need to. We'll do a white next. And there, we'll just tie that. That's looking good. Tie a knot in it. And then we have 1 more to do. The last one won't have a knot in it. That's how we'll know what just happened. My viewfinder just shut off. I don't know why. Hopefully we're still recording. If you're watching this, we are. So there's the last one going through. Now it's back again. Very strange. Funny little trick, Sony. And there's the last strand. Now I'm not gonna pull anything tight yet until I grab this last strand that we just fed through, and I'm gonna feed that through the fall hitch itself. So I'm gonna grab this end here. I actually need to dress this up a little bit. I need to cut an angle, so I'm gonna do that right now. There's an angle there, and I need to melt it. Right there, a little twist. And now at this point, I'm actually going to reach down here and pull out the needle. Or if you have another needle, you can do that too. And now we're gonna thread this back into the needle. And now, see, here are the hitches that we just put in place. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this, we're taking that last strand and we're going up through this fall loop right there. So I'm gonna pull that through. Make sure we don't have any strands that are trying to come with us up there. And just nice and easy. Now, before I pull this all the way through, I do want to give this last loop a little tug there. Now I can pull this in place. And now I'm going to go individually down the list of strands. There's the green one. Next we have, whoops, this one, the white one's next. Next we have another white one, and then finally this green one. And then at that point we can start to pull some tension into our fall like that. Now we can take this last strand and give it a tug. And that is all there is to that. Make sure I have my fall isolated. Make sure it is your fall. And I'm going to take all the rest of the strands and cut them, leaving about 1 inch right here. So there's the cut. And I'm going to come back and melt all these little strands so they don't fray. Just like that. And lastly, I can come through and I can cut the fall strand. And I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch. And then also melt the end of that. Very good. That's how I do my fall hitches these days. Next step's going to be to give the finishing touch to the fall. All right, at this point we have our fall. I'm going to take my fingers and run it down until roughly those 2 strands, the one that's fed inside the other one and the outer sheath, the secondary strand, it's kind of at the end. And I'm just going to just lop off the very tip that we use to thread into the needle. And I like this to be about 2 feet right there. Now we're going to do something that I saw Adam Winrich do. Brilliant idea. I'm going to take that inner strand, and now I'm going to pull back the outer strand and expose the inner strand. And I'm going to go all the way back till about the halfway point. So now this is about 1 foot, and then we still have a 1 foot of 2, and then the one in and of itself is exposed. So we want to cut the middle there, and now we can let that go. We can push all that back. And you're about to see what's going to happen. This is a much better way to create a fall that has half 2 strands of paracord, but the second half of the fall is just 1 strand of parachute cord. Total length about 2 feet. Thank you, Adam Winrich, for showing me that when he came over. Now I'm just going to melt the end of the fall like that. And there we go. The fall is ready to go. Well, all right, we have just rolled the overlay. And the reason that I'm not showing the rolling of any of the bellies or the overlays is because nothing's changed. And I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to be, especially now we're pushing 3 hours. So if you want to know how I roll whips, there's a little video in the description. Nothing's changed. Alrighty, well, I have the whip here and we are getting ready to bind the end here with artificial sinew, and then we're going to take our razor blade, a fresh one, and we're going to cut off this excess parachute cord. And to help us find exactly where the steel starts so we can avoid the steel, we've got this little strong magnet to help us determine where that is. So I'm going to start off with some artificial sinew. And I want to wrap this tightly. And we did this with every belly. And we're also doing this with the overlay. And it's going to create a nice solid foundation for the staples to drive into, to hold our heel knot in place. Nothing crazy, but we want a few really firm wraps. So I'm happy with that. Left my scissors over there, so I'm actually just going to cut this artificial sinew with my razor blade like this. And now I can just kind of press that into place. At this point, I'm going to take some hockey tape and we're going to wrap it over this. And the idea with this is to give us a little bit more constriction while at the same time protecting the artificial sinew, so if we accidentally cut into a little bit of it, it's not going to all unravel on us. So as simple as that, we just have some sinew and some tape. So I've got my knife, and just one more time, we're going to see with the magnet, steel begins here, and I am just going to set my blade, firm pressure downward, and I'm going to cut straight through. Try to twist it so we can get it nice and flat. That's why it's important to use a nice, fresh blade. So we just cut 360 degrees. It's still a little bit messy, but we're going to dress that up. Firstly, we're going to dress it up with our scissors and just kind of get these extra frays out of the way. We want this to be flat too. If you look back and you accidentally made an angle cut, it's not a big deal. Just try to go through with your scissors and just dress things up a little bit. That's what I'm doing here. And we can take a lacing needle here and just kind of probe here. I just want to see how deep my steel is, and it is right there, so we're right on the money. And at this point, I like to grab my lighter. It's in my pocket, and just one more little snip there. 2, maybe 3. And I'm gonna put it on high heat. There's a link to Amazon. If you use the link to get this lighter, I get a little kickback for it, so if you use it, that'd be great. And I'm just gonna give it a little singe here. Ooh, kept going on its own there for a minute. There we go, just toasting it. Just like that. Now it's not perfect, so I'm just gonna, sometimes after you melt it, you'll see a little bit of unevenness that was kind of hiding. So just dressing it up, kind of like a farrier works on a horse's hoof. If you need to, you can use the blade and trim things up a little bit, but that's what we're going for. A nice flat surface. At this point, we can prepare our heel knot foundation and then tie the knot. I'm not going to show that in this video because I just a few weeks ago put out a very detailed video right there in the top right. Click that link and you can see how I attach the heel knot foundation and tie the knot. So I'm going to do that now. Alright, so I just finished the heel knot. I decided to go for the same color scheme here. Highlight white with that tree frog green. I really like the way that it really kind of makes it pop. Anyways, the next step is going to be to tie this transition knot. We're going to be using the same colors. I have 2 pieces of gutted parachute cord. Both of these are 2 feet long approximately. White and tree frog green. The next step before we actually start tying this knot is going to be building a simple knot foundation with artificial sinew. All I'm going to be doing here is picking a place that I want the transition knot to be. And I want it to be covering up the place where we transition into the herringbone. So about right there will be the middle. And then we'll begin wrapping. And all this is doing is it's creating a little foundation, a little hill, if you will, for our knot to adhere to. The edges of this 5x4 2-pass Turk's head knot that we're about ready to tie are going to just kind of flow over the edges of this little foundation. And artificial sinew is sticky enough to where we don't need to drive any staples through. So once I've established the width here, this length, it's about 3/4 to a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch. Depending on what type of knot you use, that may need to be bigger or smaller. But we're going to be using a 2-pass 5x4. So the size you see here is sufficient. I'm going to cut that. And just before we begin tying the knot, I'm just going to lightly roll this along the table here just to get it all the same height. And I am very satisfied with that. Alright, at this point I've grabbed one of my 2-foot pieces of parachute cord that's gutted, 550 or 650. I'm using 550. I've threaded one end into my needle. The other end I'm going to lay 45 degrees just to the left of my foundation. Holding that with my thumb, I'm going to go around the back and I'm going to go over that one. So it's an X. Holding that with my index finger right there. Then we're going to go around the back. I'm going to go over this one right there. Under this one. Under that one, right? And then over this one, holding that with my index finger again, like that. Coming underneath. And I'm going to go under this one. Over this one. Over that one. Under this one. Make sure that one doesn't slide over. We're going to move this to the side there. And over that last one, once again holding that with my index finger, twisting again. Now you can see I'm going to be going over that one. There's a little strand in there. Over this one, under that one, over the next one. This is the one we're going over, under, over, under, and over that last one. Like that. Now we can turn everything. And just temporarily I'm going to start as if I'm starting the second pass in green. I'm not going to be starting it in green. We'll just do that to hold that in place. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle off there. Now we can slide this into place here. I'm going to do that right now. You can see it's still plenty loose enough to where we can move anything we want, anywhere we want it. So now I'm just going to go through and kind of pull the slack out of one part of it. Find one strand and go work your way all the way around. And if I'm going too fast on this transition knot, let me know, and I'd be happy to make another video on it. Something slower. This whole video is more so a general how I make my bullwhips nowadays, so I'm not going heavily into depth on one particular thing. So at this point, that looks pretty good. I feel like the edges here are sufficiently covering that. As you can see, everything's nice and loose. We're going to be relying on the natural filling in of the knot for tightness. At this point, I like to find where this strand is going to be under that strand, meaning that I'm going to pull this out, and this is not an exact science. This is how I do my two-tone Turk's head knots. You may do it differently. That's all right. I'm just going to cut it right there, pull that out. Don't need that anymore. So this is where that strand ended. We just pulled that out and cut it off. And I'm going to take my second 2-foot strand and I'm going to melt it on to that. And you've seen me do this before. Melt 2 of those, just like that. Because they're both nylon material, they will indeed fuse together. And that is a stronger bond than you might think it is. But it doesn't need to be extra strong here. This is just so that we can get secondary color. I'm going to take a little angle here, roll that in my fingertips so I can thread this now into my lacing needle. And we are ready to begin the second pass of this 5x4 Turk's head knot. Now you'll notice that these do not line up. That's all right. I am not worried about that at all, and I'll show you why. We want in the end this joint here to be tucked underneath this strand. So what we're going to do, just the way we tightened up the whole knot, we're just going to shimmy things over a little bit. Pull that there. Now it's where we want it to be. And I'm just going to work that strand all the way around like that. There we go. Around and around until we reach the end. And one more revolution to go. Almost there. There it is, right there. And look at this. Our strand is right where we want it to be. The joint is underneath that strand. I think that's going to fit together nicely. So I'm going to inspect this knot one more time. Everything looks good. I'm happy with it. And I think it's time we can begin our next pass. And all I'm doing is following the leader. Whatever this initial pass does, I'm mimicking it to the right. Goes over, I'll go over. Goes under, I'll go under. And that's all there is to this. So over that one, under here. Once again, guys, I'm not pulling this extra tight. I'm just pulling it snug. I'm just letting the natural filling in of the knot do the tightening for me. And then at the end, we're going to wax this whip too, so that's going to also create a tremendous amount of tightness. It's just a game of follow the leader. To tie this off, all I'm going to do is act like I'm going to continue on to a third pass. But right at this point, I'm going to cut things. One big pull on the white, one big pull on the green, and a snip to both. Make sure I don't cut my fingers off. I'm going to fray it a little bit with my thumb and hit it with the lighter. And just touch it like that briefly. And that should do it. It's going to get a little yellow on us, unfortunately, but the way things are. There we go. So there is the knot. Next thing I'm going to do is just take it and roll it. A better thing to do with rolling a knot would be to grab a piece of wood like this, and this doesn't take a lot of pressure, guys. Don't over smash your knot. You can even hammer it a little bit like this, but the best way I think to do it is grab something that's small enough so you can kind of work into those corners like that. See, then I'm really just kind of getting in here, and then I'm going to turn the whip around here, and I'm going to get this corner too. It just helps everything just kind of melt into place, if you will, flow. And then a general roll to the whole knot itself. And there it is. 2 pass 5x4. This whip is ready to wax. Okay guys, we have some wax here that is heating up. And to this day, I still use one of these Roast Masters. This particular one is by the brand Toast Master. I don't know why it's called that, but it is. This one is not the original. The other one rusted and I had to throw it away. And my mom found this one at a garage sale for me. And she called me up and asked if I wanted it. I said, absolutely. So I think it was like $10. But you can get these on Amazon, and I have a little affiliate link in the description, so if you use that link, I get a little kickback off of it. So wherever you buy it, just make sure that it's a fairly good length, because even with this one, some of my longer handled whips, 15-inch handle whips, will not fit in all the way, unfortunately. So I have to kind of put it in at an angle and then take a cup, dip it in the wax, and bathe the whip. So that's the only drawback. This one's about 20 inches by 12 inches. So I'm still using the same type of wax. I'm just using pure paraffin wax to wax my whips. And some of you guys were asking if you could use candle wax. And I would say, yes, you can, but I don't know if the candle has like additives in it, like dyes and different additives for scent, for good smells. I don't know if that would inhibit the wax from sticking to the whip, the parachute cord. I don't know. So give it a try. I honestly don't know if it would work. I think it will, but I'm not sure. If you have access to it, just get the pure paraffin wax. There's also a link in the description for an Amazon purchase. You can get 10-pound blocks of this stuff. How much wax am I using these days? I'm just trying to use enough to where the whip is fully submerged. If the whip is fully submerged, that's enough wax. At what temperature? Well, 220 degrees. Adam Winrich told me about some of the benefits of waxing nylon whips a few years ago, and up until that point, I didn't know just how much that wax tightens the parachute cord. It is a tremendous night and day difference from unwaxed and waxed. And my thought was the higher temperature should tighten the paracord a little more. And yes, it does. 180 degrees to 220 is a big difference. So now all my whips are waxed at 220 degrees. And I found that the whip has a lot more life, a lot more springiness, and I just think it overall works better. In addition to that, when you pull the whip out of the wax, there isn't some wax that is kind of starting to freeze already on the whip. Because you're starting at 220 degrees, by the time you pull the whip out of the wax completely, it still is hot enough to where it doesn't have a chance to start hardening on the whip. I know that was a problem at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. To test the temperature of the wax, I'm using one of these cheap infrared thermometers. And don't let the price fool you. This thing was probably $15, but it's still very accurate. Right now the floor is 67 degrees, 67. I tested it. These things work. So what I like to do is I take off this lid here. And then right before I take a reading, I like to stir the wax. And the idea is maybe the surface layer, the wax on the very top, is a little bit cooler than the wax underneath. So that just gets everything equalized. 215. So just a little bit more. A little bit more, and this thing will be ready to go. Now, I will say right now, if you use one of these Roast Masters, be careful, be smart. Every time I start this thing up and plug it in and get wax melting, I start a timer on my phone because I do not want to plug this in, forget it's going, and leave home. Just like, treat it like a stove, treat it like an oven. Just be smart. Don't ever leave it unattended. Another thing I recommend doing is not cranking the heat all the way. Now this thing is like what they call a double boiler. Basically, there's a tray that you set in there. The first tray you're supposed to fill up with water, and that boils and heats what's in the next one, which is the wax. But I don't use that anymore because what was going on was the water was turning to steam and spilling over the side and causing everything to rust. So I don't know, if you don't use water, I think the temperatures have the ability to get a lot hotter, and that's another reason that I don't turn it full blast. I turn it to 12 o'clock, which is half heat, and I think that's safer to do it that way. The manufacturers probably never guessed that we whip makers would be putting wax in this thing and heating it up, so I don't know if it would be safe to turn it full blast, but I don't. Alright guys, I just took a temperature reading on the wax, and we are sitting at about 220, right where we want to be. So what I'm going to do is I have the whip here, and I just coiled it up so it'll fit nicely. And now I'm just going to drop the whole thing in the wax. I'm going to dunk any portions of the whip that are not fully submerged. And there we have it. You can see all the little bubbles in there. I like to leave it in there for about 3 minutes to 4 minutes. I feel like that's enough. At this point, it's been about 3 minutes, and there are hardly any bubbles coming off of the whip. I know Rhett Kelly of cowwhips.com, he would leave it in there for quite a long time until the bubbles completely stopped. I don't leave it in there quite that long, maybe because I'm impatient, but we're going on about 3.5 minutes now. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take some paper towels, 2 paper towels, 2 rags, whatever, to soak up the wax. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, now that I'm going to reach in the thing, I unplug it, just to eliminate any chance of an electrical shock. I unplugged it from the wall, it's off. I'm going to grab a popsicle stick or anything really, and just reach in and grab the heel like this. Just kind of pat it dry. And now I'm going to run my hand down the entire whip. And don't wear good clothes when you're doing this, because the wax, if it splashes and gets on your clothing, it will be very difficult to get off. So we're just going to go ahead and go down the whole whip. Once the whip is out of the wax, we're going to turn over here, and I have a tarp. Oh, I've been looking for this lacing needle. Sweet. I'm going to take the whip, and I'm just going to just lay it out in a semi-coiled position like this, just straightening the fall. And I'm going to let this sit until it is completely cooled. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to spin up a cracker. I'm using number 2 sized nylon thread, the same stuff I was using to bind the bellies of the whips. You can also use the inner strands of parachute cord guts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double up 3 times this stuff, and then I'm going to cut the end here. I'm going to take a pair of hemostats. I'm going to clamp all 3 strands on one end like this. And I'm going to hold the other end and spin the hemostats. I'm convinced there's no better way, no more efficient way to make a cracker. I saw Caliber Whips do this, Connor Hack, a couple years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. So here it is. I'm going to find the middle with my chin, and then I'm going to hang on to the end on the hemostats, and I'm going to let that go, and then just kind of run my fingers down it. At this point, I'm going to unclamp this, and I'm going to tie 2 knots consecutively. There's 1, there's 2. And then I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And today I like my crackers to be about 8 inches long. That's 6 inches of twisted part and 2 inches of tassel. Now we can connect this to the fall. So here's how I'm doing that. Here is the end of the fall. I'm going to take a fid or a lacing needle. And about almost a ½ inch, I'm going to make a hole in this fall right here. And this is where we're going to be sliding our cracker through. Just going to put it on the table, use that for leverage. So I have the needle through there just like that. And I'm going to make it easier on myself because I used this lacing needle. I can actually just thread one end of the cracker inside here. Hopefully this will work. I think it will. A couple more twists. Those threads are starting to bite a little bit. And now we can go ahead and pull this through like that. Now we can unthread that. At this point, I'm going to open up a little eye. I'm going to untwist this a little bit. So as you can see, that's going through there. I've opened up an eye, and I'm going to put the fall through that eye. Just like that. And now I can pull that nice and tight. And now I'm going to take advantage of that little tab there that I created. So I'm going to fold this back. Cracker's in the left hand. I'm going to fold that down. I'm going to do an overhand half hitch knot like this. And then I'm going to come right through there just like that. And then I'm going to pull this tight so that the knot closes right over that portion. Just like that. And I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So you not only have the security of an actual hole in the fall that this thing is tethered onto, but you also have it holding there. This whip is finished and ready to crack.